Chapter 1: A Ghost That Lingers. There's a ghost that never left us. It doesn't wear armor or speak Latin anymore. It doesn't ride horses down cobbled roads or command armies in foreign lands. But it lingers in the lines of our architecture, in the cadence of our language, in the silence between modern laws and ancient codes. We live among its echoes, often unaware, like children walking through the ruins of a story they were born into but never told. You can't always see it, but sometimes, in the hush of a government hall or the shadow of a stone pillar, it makes itself known. Rome was supposed to fall, and it did, in the way a statue crumbles over centuries, not all at once, but slowly, imperceptibly. But even now, its dust clings to our clothes. Its myths have bled into our definitions of civilization, of greatness, of control. There's a reason we don't just say empire, we say Roman Empire, as though it is the reference point for all that came after. Like a measure of magnitude, the ghost of Rome doesn't haunt us like something evil. It's more seductive than that. It haunts like an old love, familiar, intoxicating, tragic. We see it in how we build, in how we govern, in how we wage war and peace. We say we've moved on, but we keep coming back. Cities still rise in grids. Laws still draw from codes written on Roman tablets. Justice still wears a blindfold and carries a scale. And we still sit in circles and argue like senators. Rome didn't just give us aqueducts and roads. It gave us memory. Not facts, but the idea of order, of permanence, of a civilization so vast it seemed to bend time itself. And that idea, polished, golden, and cracked, is the ghost that remains. Not in statues or ruins, but in us, in our yearning for power without chaos, in our obsession with glory, in our discomfort with fragility. Rome was not just a place. It was an aspiration, an answer to the human fear of disorder, an empire that promised structure, identity, destiny, and like all promises, it couldn't last. But its collapse wasn't an end. It was a transformation. It became a whisper in the Western mind, a blueprint, a mirror, a warning. Some ghosts scream. This one only murmurs, quietly, persistently. It appears in times of uncertainty, when the present feels too fragile and the future feels too loose. That's when we reach for the old shapes, for marble arches, for titles like senator or republic, for laws we say are new, but carry the DNA of empires long vanished. Even our entertainment resurrects it. How many times have we remade Caesar in film? How many digital colosseums have we built in games and in politics? The ghost speaks in symbols, in laurels and eagles, in the curve of a dome, in the weight of the word empire, and still it asks, did I ever really leave? Or have you simply become me? Because perhaps the ghost didn't survive by accident. Perhaps we kept it alive, because we need it. Because without it, maybe we don't know how to dream large or fall properly. Maybe Rome taught us not just how to rise, but how to fall grandly, tragically, beautifully. So we rehearse the same plays with new actors. We rename the forums and call them parliaments or senates. We speak of the Republic as though it never truly died. We build glass towers where once there were marble columns, but the shape remains. The need remains. There's a reason people still say, when in Rome, as if to be in Rome is to be within a rule book of behavior older than time. And maybe it is, because deep down, Rome isn't just a civilization. It's a state of mind, a way of organizing not just the world, but the soul. Even those who fear empire, who resist the old structures, they resist something they still recognize. That's how deeply the ghost has sunk its roots. Not as a specter of tyranny, but as a myth of meaning. A whisper that says, civilization can be shaped, that people can be ordered, that eternity is worth chasing, even if we always fall short. And that might be the most Roman thing of all, the pursuit of immortality in stone, in thought, in memory. So the ghost of Rome does not fade. It walks among modernity like a patient actor waiting for its cue. And we, without knowing, continue the script. Every time we draw a border, raise a flag, write a law, speak of legacy, we're answering to something ancient. We're conversing with that ghost. And maybe we always will. Chapter 2. The name that echoes. Rome, the name itself is heavy. It does not rush or flutter. It rests in the mouth like a stone. It feels older than breath, older than war, older than the very idea of history. When we say it not like a name, but like a spell. Rome, it doesn't need explanation. It doesn't ask for adjectives. It carries its own mythology, its own weight, its own silence. There are names in history that require context, dynasties that rose and fell, kings who ruled and vanished, but Rome needs none. It simply is. It has become more than a city, more than a fallen empire. It is a symbol, a language, an echo that continues to shape how we define greatness. And that's the strange thing about it. It's just 4 letters, 1 syllable, nothing elaborate. But it sounds like authority. It sounds like structure. It sounds like something that should never have ended, and maybe never really did. Rome is the name we whisper when we speak of order amidst chaos. When the world feels fractured, unstable, we remember that once it was organized. Once there was an empire that built straight roads, aqueducts, and laws. It may have fallen in time, but its name didn't fall with it. It remained untouched by the erosion of stone and the burning of cities. Rome outlived its ruins. There's something deeply human in that. We build names to last longer than the things they describe. And Rome is the proof that some names achieve immortality. It became the axis around which we turn when we speak of civilization. Even in its decline, we didn't abandon the word. We resurrected it. We repurposed it. Every kingdom that came after tried to borrow its gravity. The Holy Roman Empire, the Second Rome, the Third Rome, each desperate to claim a piece of that legacy. Because Rome didn't just represent territory, it represented legitimacy. To claim the name was to claim continuity, as if to say, we are not new. We are the heirs. The name was a shield, a banner, a torch passed from one generation of rulers to the next, each hoping its glow would not dim. That's what makes Rome different from every other fallen power. It didn't vanish into silence. It left behind a resonant hum, like the lingering vibration of a deep bell. Rome, it's not nostalgia. It's not even memory. It's identity adopted, adapted, preserved. And it finds its way into strange corners of our modern world. Listen carefully. The word hides in plain sight. Romance languages, Roman numerals, Roman law, Roman Catholicism, Roman architecture, Roman calendars, Roman roads still visible from space. Even the way we count time, organize cities, build governments, they all nod to Rome, whether we notice or not. It's as if the name has planted itself deep into the cultural, soil of the West, and from that soil, it continues to grow roots. But this echo isn't always a comfort. Sometimes the name brings weight, a kind of pressure. Because when we invoke Rome, we invoke not only its glory, but its pride, its ambition, its hubris. The name is a mirror, and sometimes it reflects the parts of us we don't wish to see. The thirst for conquest, the obsession with control, the illusion of permanence. That is the paradox of Rome's name. It shines like gold, but casts a long shadow, and we keep walking beneath it, willingly. Politicians call for a return to Roman values, forgetting that Rome's values also included collapse. Philosophers study its rise, its administration, its structure, hoping to learn how to replicate it, or how to avoid its fate. And always, the name lingers. It never shouts. It doesn't need to. It is embedded in the foundation of everything we've built since. Sometimes I wonder if Rome would have meant so much to us had it not fallen. Maybe its death was its final act of power. By dying, it became legend. By ending, it began to echo. Like a voice in a vast cathedral, its absence became louder than its presence. And so, we keep saying it. Rome, as if the sound itself keeps the memory alive. As if repetition holds back decay. But maybe it's more than that. Maybe we speak the name to remind ourselves of our own fragility. That even the mightiest empires turn to dust. That all names, no matter how sacred, are held by breath and tongue and memory and nothing more. Still, we speak it, with reverence, with caution, with awe. Rome, the name has become part of our mythology, even if we've forgotten the details. Most of us can't name its emperors, can't describe its wars or reforms or collapses, but we know Rome, or we believe we do. And maybe that belief is more powerful than knowledge. Rome has become a story we tell about order, about pride, about loss. And, like all great stories, it finds ways to repeat itself. In politics, in architecture, in ideology, in our desire to build things that last forever. But forever is a dangerous word. Rome reminds us of that. Its name is carved into stone, but stone can crack. Its laws were written in ink, but ink fades. And yet, here it is still spoken, still alive, still echoing. So what do we do with that echo? Do we chase it, mimic it, learn from it, or simply let it remind us that names, like empires, are not immortal, but some come close. Some become more than history. Some become myth and Rome. Rome became the name we whisper when we dream of permanence, when we fear chaos, when we long for a map that doesn't shift beneath our feet. It became the name that echoes long after the walls have fallen. Chapter 3. The Illusion of Collapse. They say it fell in 476 AD, a date carved into textbooks, a moment packaged neatly for school exams and historical timelines. The Western Roman Empire, done, ended, gone. But history rarely obeys dates, and empires don't vanish like coins slipping into darkness. They linger, quietly, invisibly, especially when they were never just about land or armies. Rome, more than anything, was an idea. A system, a story people agreed to believe. And stories don't fall, they evolve. What collapsed in 476 AD was a symbol, a crown, an office, a title. The last Western emperor, a boy named Romulus Augustulus, was dethroned. The throne was left vacant. But even as the imperial robes were folded and dismissed, The machinery of Rome kept turning. Roads were still used. Laws still enforced. Markets still opened under arches built centuries earlier. People didn't wake up the next morning and stop being Roman. They still called themselves citizens. They still followed the rhythms of a world Rome had structured. The empire may have lost its shape, but not its influence. It seeped into the bones of Europe, into the veins of what would become kings, popes, generals. It didn't die. It adapted. This is the illusion of collapse. We think of empires as buildings, structures that crumble. But Rome was never just stone. It was bureaucracy. It was theology. It was culture encoded into habit. A collapse is something you hear, a crash, a scream, a silence. But Rome collapsed like a tide pulling back. Slowly, gradually, until people looked round and realized they were no longer standing in an empire, but still standing on its floor. The Germanic kings who took over called themselves Rex, but styled themselves like emperors. The Roman Senate continued to meet. The Church, once a persecuted sect, took on the garments of Roman administration. Latin didn't disappear. It spread. It fractured into French, Spanish, Italian, and more. In every syllable, Rome breathed again. We like clean endings, final chapters. But Rome denied us that, because it didn't collapse in the way we wanted. It mutated. Its fall was not a death, but a diffusion. Its power scattered like ashes in the wind, settling into soil that would later grow kingdoms, republics, revolutions. Even the Eastern Empire, the Byzantines called themselves Roman until the very end. The name lived on, even when the world around it transformed. Collapse implies failure, a fall from grace. But what if collapse is sometimes strategy? What if Rome let go of its skin to survive in deeper ways, through law, through church, through architecture and education and identity? Its citizens became Europeans. Its faith became Catholicism. Its capital became relic and pilgrimage. And in every era since, someone has tried to rebuild it. Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the Romans. The Holy Roman Empire claimed its legacy for nearly 1,000 years. Mussolini draped himself in Roman symbols, hoping to revive what had never truly died. And even now, Washington, D.C. builds with Roman pillars. Paris with Roman symmetry. London with Roman law. The empire is gone, but the shape remains. There is power in myths that refuse to disappear. Rome became a ghost in the machine of Western civilization, not haunting it, but guiding it, whispering suggestions, echoing in constitutions, in architecture, in languages. What other empire, long gone, still determines the calendar, still names our planets, still decides how we govern? The illusion of collapse is comforting. It tells us that when something ends, it's over, that history is tidy, that ruins are lifeless. But Rome shows us otherwise, that ruins can still teach, that systems can outlive their founders, that collapse can be a beginning, not an end. Because when we say Rome fell, what we really mean is, it changed costume. It left the stage as emperor and returned as lawgiver, bishop, philosopher, engineer. It stopped marching with legions and started whispering through scholars. It went underground, but never disappeared. So perhaps collapse is a word for those who only see the surface. Look deeper, and you'll find continuity disguised as chaos. The Senate is gone, but we still debate in assemblies. The forums are quiet, but our cities still hum with their patterns. The legions have disbanded, but our armies carry their formations, their discipline, their salute. Rome was never meant to last forever, not as a state, but as a framework, as a shadow beneath modern life. That part has never collapsed. We still live in a world of borders drawn with Roman logic. We still worship order the way they did. We still believe that with enough law, enough roads, enough monuments, we can conquer time. But time cannot be conquered. It only transforms. And Rome, more than any empire, understood that. It didn't fall. It transformed into myth, into memory, into the ghost we still follow. So the next time you walk beneath a dome, or recite rites under a constitution, or hear a word with Latin roots, ask yourself what truly collapsed. The city, the army, the crown, or just a chapter, while the story kept going. The illusion of collapse is that we ever believed something so vast, so deeply embedded, could simply vanish. But Rome didn't vanish. It waited, it watches, and maybe, just maybe, it still dreams of return. Chapter 4. In the Bones of Cities. Walk through Washington, through Paris, through London, and you'll feel it not just in the grand boulevards or the government buildings, but in the bones of the city itself. Arches that rise not out of necessity, but legacy. Columns that hold not just weight, but memory. Domes that mirror the heavens in a way the ancients once believed could speak to the gods. It's all there, hiding in plain sight, wrapped in steel and glass and modern ambition. But beneath it all, there is a whisper, and that whisper is Rome. Not the Rome of maps or Caesars or chariots. The Rome that became a blueprint, a silent architect shaping the skeletons of cities long after the empire fell. You see, empires don't just fall, they sink, like roots, and from those roots grow things that don't remember why they were planted in the first place. Cities rise, guided by forgotten hands, and in every capital city that dares to call itself global, echoes of Rome shape the way we move, the way we gather, the way we rule. Think of Washington, D.C., a city designed with intention, with symmetry, with order, as if trying to summon the spirit of the Forum. The Capitol dome rises not by accident, but by inheritance. Its pillars, its pediments, its careful geometry, all borrowed, not copied, claimed. A visual declaration, we are the heirs. Move across the Atlantic to Paris, where Haussmann's avenues slice the city like legionnaire roads, where triumphal arches stand not just for victory but for permanence. Napoleon dreamed in Roman scale. His empire may have crumbled, but the stone remains. In London, where law and language bear the weight of Latin origins, where old cathedrals mimic and courthouses echo the Roman ideal of judgment under stone, Rome breathes again. Not with the voice of emperors, but with the quiet authority of tradition. These cities do not just resemble Rome, they carry it in their DNA. Rome was never a single place. It was an organizing principle, and its principles didn't fade, they evolved. Cities that never bowed to Caesar now bow to his influence, unconsciously. The shape of a plaza, the arc of a street, the symbolic center from which all distances are measured. These are not modern ideas. They are inherited ones. Urban planning, once functional, became philosophical. Rome believed in spaces that taught people how to behave. Walk through a Roman forum, and you understood hierarchy, power, access. That same logic lives on in every capital city, where architecture is used not only to shelter, but to signal. Glass towers may rise above us now, but they often mimic the vertical ambition of Rome's great columns. Even in our skylines, we trace ancient dreams upward. Why? Because cities are not just places, they are mirrors of the civilizations that built them. And Rome, more than any other civilization, built for forever. It's why their ruins still feel alive, why their roads still hold shape, why their walls, when you run your hand across them, still seem to vibrate. The same logic guides our concrete and steel, even if we've forgotten the source. A courthouse with Corinthian columns, a museum shaped like a temple, a presidential palace echoing the lines of a basilica. These are not coincidences, they are choices. And choices are never neutral. We choose to imitate what we admire, and admiration becomes ideology. So, in the bones of our cities, we find the bones of Rome. But not just in stone. In law, in ritual, in the way we gather, in the way we organize space. Zoning codes, legislative chambers, plazas, and monuments. These are civic tools, and Rome invented the original set. And with each generation, we reshaped them. Added glass, added light, but kept the foundation. The city became a text, written and rewritten. And Rome was the first author. Even the concept of a capital city as the brain of a nation's central, symbolic, ritualistic, emerges from Roman logic. The empire did not just build roads, it built thought, and cities became the vessels for that thought. That's why walking through modern capitals can feel oddly familiar, even if you've never been, because you've walked them before in history books, in ruins, in stories. The rhythm is the same, the bones unchanged. Even time itself bends to Rome, the calendar, the structure of days, the way we measure weeks, the idea of civic holidays, public forums. These are ideas that took root in urban space, and once planted, they refuse to die. What's haunting is how unaware we are of it, how easily we accept the grid of a city, the architecture of power, the monumental scale, as if these were natural, inevitable. But they're not. They're learned, they're inherited, they are Roman, and yet they wear new names. They fly new flags. They reflect new gods. But the form never changed. The shape of our cities tells us who we are, and if we look closely, they tell us who we've always been. So maybe Rome never left. Maybe it dissolved into the mortar, the logic, the steel beams of ambition. Maybe it lives not as a memory, but as a structure, a skeleton beneath concrete, a ghost made of angles, a voice speaking in the language of design. That is the illusion, that cities are modern, when in truth they are ancient stories repeated in new materials. And Rome is the story we keep retelling, quietly, constantly, in the bones of cities. Chapter 5. The Architecture of Power. They built with symmetry. They ruled with order. They understood that to last, a structure must look eternal. The Romans were not the first to build, but they were the first to build as if time could be conquered. Their architecture was not merely functional, it was psychological. It told stories. It asserted dominance. It whispered obedience into stone. Power, to them, was not just armies or laws, it was geometry. A perfect arch, a column that reached just high enough to make you feel small, a dome that echoed your voice back to you. reminding you that even your words were not fully your own. They mastered the visual language of control. They built with purpose, and the purpose was always power. Look at the aqueducts. Not just practical, but monumental. Not hidden underground, but raised high, slicing across valleys like declarations. Look at the baths, the temples, their scale was not for comfort. It was to remind you where you stood in the order of things. Beneath it, inside it, surrounded by it. Architecture was how Rome encoded its ideals, strength, permanence, hierarchy, everything in its place, everything aligned. They took the chaos of the world and forced it into grids, arches, avenues. They reshaped nature itself, flattening hills, rerouting rivers, carving mountains, all to make the landscape speak. Roman, their cities were laid out like military camps, rigid, logical, centralized. At the heart, the forum, the temple, the seat of judgment. The further you walked from the center, the further you were from power. Space was status. Order was sacred. And every stone obeyed. This was not beauty for beauty's sake. This was messaging. Silent propaganda. A temple front on a courthouse. A triumphal arch on a bridge. Power made visible. Permanence made believable. Because the greatest illusion of all was that Rome could not fall, and they embedded that illusion into every building. Concrete was their secret weapon, but ideology was their true foundation. With concrete, they broke the limits of stone. With ideology, they broke the limits of doubt. They built the Pantheon with a dome so vast it defied belief, an empty oculus at its center, as if the gods themselves were watching. They didn't just build for the present. They built for memory, for the echoes of generations, for the eyes of people not yet born. And that's why their architecture still stands. Not because the materials were superior, but because the message was, this is eternal. This is sacred. This is Rome. Even after the empire crumbled, the architecture survived. Because power, once given shape, doesn't die easily. The basilica became the church. The Senate Hall became the parliament. The temple became the museum. The forms remained, even when the gods changed. Even now, world leaders stand beneath Roman arches. Courts deliberate under Roman columns. Presidents take oaths on Roman steps. We imitate what intimidates us. And Roman architecture was built to intimidate, to humble, to control. The architecture of power didn't need to scream. It whispered with weight. It spoke in silence. It made you look up, not out. And by looking up, you lowered yourself. That was the point. Buildings are not just shelter. They are statements. And Rome's buildings said one thing again and again. We are here to last. Not just for a year or a reign, but for all of time. They believed that power, to be real, had to be made physical. And once made physical, it had to resist time. Time, the true enemy of all empires. So they fought it with stone, with concrete, with symmetry. And somehow, it worked. Their empire ended, but their buildings did not. And every civilization after them knew it. That's why kings and tyrants and presidents all borrow from Roman architecture. Because to rule is not just to command, it is to perform. And the Roman stage was built perfectly for that. Columns are not just decoration. They are memory. Arches are not just support. They are celebration. Steps are not just for climbing. They are for ascending ritually, symbolically, politically. Nothing in Roman architecture was accidental. Everything had meaning. Everything had purpose. And that purpose was always to reinforce the center, the heart, the emperor, the state. Even homes of the wealthy imitated the state. The atrium, the peristyle, the mosaic of the gods on the floor. Because to live like a Roman was to inhabit the architecture of power even at home. And those patterns have survived. The columns of Wall Street, the domes of Capitol Hill, the plazas of European capitals. They are not Roman in name, but in soul. Because the soul of Rome was poured into its structures. And structures are harder to erase than names. You can rename a country. You can tear down a flag, but buildings remain. Roads remain. The geometry of power remains. Rome understood that true dominance is spatial. It's about how people move, where they stop, what they see when they look up. It's about creating awe, creating inevitability, making people feel that what surrounds them has always been and always will be. That is the deepest kind of power, not fear, not violence, but permanence. Rome built for permanence. And in doing so, it achieved a kind of immortality. Because every time we walk through a colonnade, every time we sit in a Senate chamber, every time we gather in a plaza shaped like a forum, we are not just honoring Rome, we are continuing it. The empire may be gone, but the architecture of power it created still holds us, still shapes us, still reminds us, silently, that some ideas refuse to crumble. Some walls do not fall, and some shadows stretch longer than 1,000 years. Chapter 6. Law and Fire. They say the sword built the empire, but the law preserved it. While the legions marched and conquered, it was the codex, not the blade, that bound the empire together. Roman law did more than govern people, it trained them to think like Romans. Long after the swords rusted into the soil, the words remained. You can still feel them today. In courtrooms and constitutions, in contracts and codes, in the very language of power. The word justice, the idea of rights, the concept of a citizen, these are not modern creations. They are Roman inventions, carried forward like embers. 1,000 years of legal evolution, carved in wax tablets, etched in stone, debated in marble halls. Rome was obsessed with order. Not just military discipline, but social logic. Everything had its place, and law was the map that made sense of the chaos. From the 12 tables to Justinian's codex, they catalogued human behavior, regulated property, defined punishment, and made the act of rule a matter of principle, not just power. In doing so, they gave birth to something bigger than themselves. The law became not just a tool of Rome, it became Rome. And when the empire burned, the law did not. It smoldered, it waited, and then it spread. Charlemagne's empire inherited it. So did the papacy, the Holy Roman Empire, Napoleonic France, civil law systems around the globe, even the United States, with its constitution and senate and capital, echoes Rome not just in architecture, but in legal thought. When a judge invokes precedent, when a senator debates a bill, when a contract defines obligations, that's Rome speaking through time. We don't just mimic their words, we mirror their logic. The idea that law can outlive rulers, that principle can bind the powerful, that written codes can tame ambition. These were Roman beliefs, and we've built entire civilizations on their shoulders. But there's more. The word Senate still exists. The structure remains. Deliberation, representation. Debate. Rome didn't invent politics, but they systematized it. They made it visible, formal, symbolic. The Senate was more than a governing body. It was a performance of permanence. To speak in the Senate was to echo centuries of thought. Even now, when senators rise to speak, they often stand beneath eagles, beneath Latin inscriptions, beneath stone borrowed from Rome's own palette. The room may have changed. The fire has not. Because Roman law wasn't just legislation, it was ideology. It taught generations to believe that order could be designed, that justice could be sculpted like marble. The Romans believed in fire, sacred fire, eternal fire. The Vestal Virgins tended to it not for warmth, but for continuity. If the flame died, the empire would fall. And yet, when the flame of the empire did die, another remained. Not in temples, but in texts. The fire of Roman law didn't go out. It jumped hosts. It moved from scroll to manuscript, from monastery to university, from Latin to vernacular. It became part of Europe's bloodstream, then the world's. That's why it still burns today in civil law, in legal codes, in the structure of our institutions. We don't see it, but we live inside it. A legal contract is a descendant of Roman obligations. A judge's bench echoes the magister's seat. Our legal systems are layered with their DNA. The presumption of innocence, the right to a trial, the distinction between private and public law, all Roman, not just old ideas but active frameworks. Their laws weren't perfect, they privileged citizens, men, the elite. But even in that, they taught us what power looked like, how it operated, who it included and excluded. And in recognizing that, we began to reshape it, but always on Roman foundations. Even revolution was Roman. To revolt meant to return to the Republic. The word republic itself is Latin, res publica, the public thing. An idea that power should be shared, structured, debated. And that idea, once born, refused to die. Rome lit that fire, and we are still walking its shadows, still writing its laws, still performing its rituals. Law outlived empire, and fire outlived the sword. Because law is a kind of fire. It spreads, it illuminates, it consumes, and when Rome burned, it didn't vanish. It became light for those who came next. The Code of Justinian became the foundation for legal education. The writings of Cicero informed Enlightenment thinkers. The Roman obsession with classification, with hierarchy, with clarity became our own. We teach Roman law to law students, not out of nostalgia, but necessity, because buried in those codes are the roots of how we think about justice itself. Not just what is legal, but what is right. Rome made law an intellectual pursuit, a civic duty, a divine inheritance. The gods may have left, but the fire stayed. That is the real empire. Not marble, not territory, but rules, principles, systems that outlast those who write them. We burn today with a fire we did not start, but we keep it alive. Every courtroom is a temple. Every trial is a ritual. Every judgment is a spark. So when we say Rome fell, we forget what truly mattered. The legions are gone. The emperors are dust. But the law remains. Still burning. Still guiding. Still Roman. Chapter 7. Language. Reborn. Language is the most invisible empire. It doesn't conquer with soldiers or laws, it seeps. It slips past borders, past centuries, past collapse. And Latin, the voice of Rome, never truly died. It fractured, it morphed. It disappeared from conversation, but only to be reborn in 100 other tongues. Today, every time we speak English, French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, we're breathing Rome's breath. The words are modern, but the roots run ancient. Video, exit, justice, memory, animal, vital, form. These aren't just vocabulary. They are echoes, fossils, whispers from a vanished world. And those whispers are everywhere, not just in formal speech, but in how we think, how we write, how we name. Latin gave us not just words, but a rhythm, a logic, a structure to shape our thoughts. The Romans were meticulous about language. To speak well was to be powerful, to persuade, to write, to inscribe, that was as valued as victory in battle. Cicero's speeches were studied like sacred texts. Caesar's commentaries were literature and propaganda, weaponized on the page. Even law was a linguistic art crafted in clauses, balanced in syntax, deliberate in tone. Because to control the word was to control the world. And that belief survived the fall of Rome. It survived the dark centuries. Latin became the language of the church, of scholars, of science. Even when no one spoke it as a mother tongue, it ruled from the shadows. Universities taught in Latin, scientific. Names were written in Latin. Prayers were whispered in Latin. Contracts were sealed in Latin. And slowly, as time passed, the daughter tongues emerged not as but as heirs. Spanish carries Rome's music. Italian is Latin's heartbeat. French is Latin, dressed for court. Portuguese sings Latin with the rhythm of the sea. Even English, a Germanic tongue, carries Latin like a second soul. Through Norman conquest, through education, through empire, our academic words, our scientific words, our formal words, they are Latin in disguise. And every time we speak them, Rome speaks too. Language is more than sound, it's memory. And Latin, though no longer living, is not dead. It mutated, it scattered. It survived in fragments, in vowels, in endings, in roots. Even now, when we learn new words, we trace them back to Latin to understand them. Inscribe from inscriber to write in. Transparent from transpara to appear through. Audience from audientia, a hearing. We build meaning on Roman foundations, and we often don't even know it. That's the power of language reborn, not through force, but familiarity. It becomes part of us before we realize. A silent empire under every sentence. And that empire still grows. In medicine, in law, in philosophy, in theology. Wherever precision is needed, Latin answers. Even the word language itself, lingua, Roman, the tongue, the speech, the code, and code it became. In religion, Latin became sacred. The Mass was said in it for over 1,000 years. In biology, Latin became eternal. Every species named in its syllables. In law, Latin became untouchable. Habeas corpus, subpoena, pro bono. In silence, Latin endured. Because Latin didn't need to be spoken to survive, it needed only to be remembered. And we did, in schools, in rituals, in books, and now in algorithms. Our AI translates from Latin, our search engines process it. Our dictionaries still bow to its authority. It's strange how a language can outlive its people, how an empire can end, but its voice still fills the earth. That's what Rome achieved. Not just victory, not just roads or laws or monuments, but breath, lingering breath, in vowels that bend like arches, in consonants that march like legions, in the silent B of debt, the ghost of debit, in the shape of a sentence, balanced like Roman architecture, subject, object, verb, logic, order, meaning. They encoded their ideals in their grammar, discipline, clarity, force. Latin isn't a soft language. It commands, it defines, it drills ideas into precision, and even in its rebirths, that tone survives. French keeps the elegance, Spanish keeps the fire, Italian keeps the melody, Portuguese keeps the soul, and English, the global voice, keeps the ambition. Because English didn't conquer the world alone. It rode on Latin's back, through the church, through science, through empire, and in doing so, it inherited Rome's ghost. That's why modern slogans echo ancient ideas. Why mottos carved on institutions still use Latin. Why a diploma, a passport, a coin still bears its mark. Because we don't just inherit language, we inherit belief. Latin taught us that words can bind, that speech can create reality, that meaning, once spoken, has power, and power, once named, persists. Rome believed in the eternal city, but what they truly built was the eternal sentence. A syntax of civilization, and every phrase we utter in its shadow carries that inheritance. So when you hear Latin in a courtroom, in a cathedral, in a school, it is not nostalgia. It is presence. The language lives not as memory, but as marrow. In every profession, in every paragraph, in every prayer, Rome speaks through us. It doesn't need translation. It already lives in our tongues, in the way we argue, in the way we classify, in the way we define ourselves against chaos. Language is order. Rome knew that, and so they crafted a language to last, to travel, to fragment and yet remain. Latin is the only empire still expanding, not by conquest, but by inheritance. And every time we open our mouths to name the world, Rome listens. Because Rome never stopped speaking. It simply changed its accent. Chapter 8. The Seduction of Order. Rome offered more than roads and taxes. It offered something subtler, more intoxicating. It promised that chaos could be tamed, that the mess of life, violence, disorder, uncertainty could be arranged into something clean, predictable, graspable. This was the seduction of Rome, not its might, but its method. The dream that if one simply followed the right rules, walked the right roads, lived beneath the right laws, then the world would make sense. That order was possible. That control was within reach. It wasn't just a city. It was an answer. And for people living in the uncertainty of tribal war, famine, superstition, and shifting loyalties, that answer was magnetic. The Roman Republic, then the Empire, didn't conquer by accident. It conquered by offering a vision of life arranged. Grid-lined cities, calendars you could trust, markets regulated by law, architecture that mirrored heaven, arches, columns, balance, everything in its place, from the heavens to the sewer systems, from the Senate to the street corner, and people bought in, not just by sword point, but willingly, because Rome didn't just build with stone, it built with structure. It codified, it classified, It created categories: citizen and non-citizen, patrician and pleb, order and disorder. It offered a moral map, and once inside, it was hard to leave, because the alternative was chaos. And Rome knew this. That's why its rituals were obsessive, why its ceremonies were grand, why its armies marched in rhythm, why the census wasn't just a count, it was control. To know was to own, to name was to tame. Even time was regulated. The Julian calendar outlived the empire, because it gave people something powerful: regularity. Rome turned disorder into routine, made meaning feel mechanical, and there's a strange comfort in that. A seduction, because we don't just fear chaos, we're haunted by it. The Romans, too. That's why they hated kings but loved emperors. Why they distrusted passion but idolized reason. They believed that the world, like a city, could be built one stone, one law, one tradition at a time. And even when the Republic died, and corruption spread, and emperors lost their minds, the structure remained. Bureaucrats kept counting. Engineers kept building. Governors kept governing. Because once the machinery of order is in place, it doesn't need perfect rulers. It just needs momentum. Rome offered that. A system stronger than any single man. And we still crave it. That's why we copy their architecture. Why our capitals look like temples. Why our governments echo their senate. Because Rome wasn't just a place, it was a blueprint. It showed us how to organize ambition, how to wrap control in beauty. Even their myths followed order. Romulus and Remus, the founding on 7 hills, the sacred geese, the omens, everything had a logic, a cycle, a cause, an effect. And that made it easier to believe that we weren't just living, we were part of a pattern. That human nature itself could be ruled like provinces. Rome turned unpredictability into performance. Gladiators, elections, funerals, triumphs, every spectacle was a reminder. Rome is in control. Rome knows the script. And even today, we mimic that. In parades, in courts, in protocols. The idea that every step matters. That tradition is stability. That order is salvation. And yet, there's a cost. Order demands obedience. It demands compromise. It can suffocate as much as it protects. The Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, was not peace for everyone. It was enforced. It was purchased in blood. But people accepted it. Because the alternative was worse. Because chaos is terrifying. And that's the seduction. The more unpredictable the world feels, the more tempting Rome's model becomes. Strong roads, clear laws, shared language, predictable cycles, even if freedom shrinks, even if individuality fades. Because predictability is powerful, it feels safe, even if it's not. That's why Rome never truly left us. Because deep down, we still chase what it offered. Not just wealth or power, but structure, systems. A belief that if we just organize well enough, the darkness will stay out. But it never does. Rome fell, order failed. The borders collapsed. The roads decayed. The rituals became empty. And yet the dream persisted. That maybe next time, with better design, better leaders, better tools, we could perfect it. Build the unbreakable system. Make the empire eternal. So we build our cities in grids. We measure our time in quarters. We organize our files, our schedules, our laws always chasing symmetry. And when things fall apart, when markets crash, when systems fail, we don't mourn the loss of freedom. We mourn the loss of structure, the collapse of certainty. That's the legacy of Rome. Not just its ruins, but its rhythms. Its obsession with order lives in us. And sometimes that helps us. It builds bridges, drafts, laws, maps, stars. But other times it blinds us, makes us worship stability over truth, system over soul. And still we return to the idea, the model, the myth, that somewhere beneath the dust, order still waits, ready to be rebuilt, reawakened. That's what Rome gave us. Not perfection, not peace, but the seduction of a world made clean. A world where chaos has a boundary, and someone, somewhere, holds the key. Chapter 9. What never gets buried. Ruins decay. Marble cracks. Statues crumble. Columns fall. And yet something remains, not in stone, but in spirit. The empire may be buried, but the hunger that built it never really goes away. Rome was not the first to dream of domination, and it wasn't the last. Its flags have fallen, its eagles are gone, but its ambition, its way of thinking lives on. Because empire is not just territory, it's a state of mind, a reflex, a whisper that says, expand, claim, rule, organize, civilize, win, and that whisper echoes, even now. New languages, new names, new ideologies, but the same old dream. We think we've moved on, that we've outgrown conquest. But listen closely, the terms just changed. Now we speak of influence, development, global presence. But the map still matters. Borders still shift, flags still rise, and power still wants more. The ruins remind us of what once was, but they also remind us of what always will be. The hunger for empire is older than Rome. Rome just gave it a face, a system, a story, a style, the Senate, the legions, the roads, the triumphs, all designed not just to rule, but to endure. And when the physical empire died, the idea did not. It lingered. It traveled. It put on new clothes. Byzantium was Rome wearing silk. The Holy Roman Empire was Rome as a ghost in gold. Napoleon marched with Roman ambition. Mussolini dreamed of a second Rome. Even America, with its Capitol dome and Senate chambers, carries the shape of that ancient dream, because the appeal of empire is not just in its strength, it's in its promise to bring order to chaos, to spread civilization, to leave a mark. Rome offered all of that, and that offer still tempts us, because deep down we don't just want to live, we want to matter. We want to build something bigger than ourselves, something that lasts. Rome showed us how. Roads that led to all corners of the world. Laws that shaped lives centuries after collapse. Words that survived the death of voices. And every nation since has studied that formula. How to conquer not just land, but minds. Not just cities, but time. Even our fiction carries it. Galactic empires. Corporate empires. 1,000 reimaginings of the same central truth, that we are still drawn to the idea of ruling all, of bringing the world under a single order, because it feels safer, simpler, glorious. Rome gave us that fantasy in marble and blood, and it stuck. Even now, we build statues, we write constitutions, we march armies, We raise flags, new faces, same patterns. We look at ruins and see decline, but we miss the continuity beneath. Because ideas don't rot the way buildings do. They wait, they evolve, they wear masks, and the Roman idea has worn many. Colonialism, globalization, geopolitics, soft power, hard power. It's all the same urge, reshaped, rebranded, but still Roman in origin. A belief that history bends toward centralization, that someone must lead, that borders are meant to be pushed. The Pax Romana didn't just promise peace, it justified expansion. And we've repeated that justification again and again. For God, for country, for progress, for democracy. But beneath the slogans, Rome lingers. In our dreams of unity, of greatness, of legacies carved in stone. Even our cities bear the imprint. Washington, Paris, Berlin, Vienna, all echoes, all tributes, all attempts to recreate the myth, and in a strange way, we're still afraid of being forgotten. That's why we build high, write laws, send probes into space. It's not just about survival, it's about memory. Rome was obsessed with memory. Triumphs were performances meant to be remembered. Inscriptions were proof of power. Coins were propaganda. And we've learned that lesson well. Social media is our new arch. Our stories, our timelines, our declarations, echoes of Roman self-mythology. Because what never gets buried is the desire to be seen, to last, to conquer death through structure. An empire offers that illusion, that through control we can escape the grave. But it's only ever that an illusion. Rome fell, all empires do. But the desire that built them that doesn't fall, it mutates, it waits, it finds new architects, new visions, new slogans, and it builds again, always with the same promise. This time will be different. This time it will last. This time the center will hold, and every generation believes it. Because the dream is beautiful, a world without chaos, a world of laws, of beauty, of triumph. That's what Rome sold, and that sale never ended. We still buy it, in steel and silicon, in treaties and bombs, in ideals and algorithms. And the irony is, while we mourn the ruins, we don't realize we're walking the same path. Different tools, same route. Because empire is not dead, it just changed its name. And what never gets buried is the blueprint. Chapter 10, Reflections in Modern Mirrors. Surveillance, uniforms, crowds under domes. These aren't just modern phenomena, they are Rome, refracted through glass and code. Rome didn't die. It adapted. It took off the laurel wreath and put on a headset. It found Wi-Fi. It learned algorithms. It rebuilt the Colosseum in pixels. And now we live inside it. Every camera on a street corner. Every ID card. Every numbered citizen. Every bureaucratic form. Every marble government building standing proudly in the middle of a concrete jungle. These aren't just coincidences, they're echoes. Rome understood the power of being seen. Surveillance isn't new. It began with imperial statues staring down from public squares, with censuses counting every soul, with the knowledge that the state knows your name. Now we call it metadata, but the gaze is the same, all-seeing, all-recording, all-controlling. The emperor has been replaced by the algorithm, but both crave the same thing. Obedience, order, optimization. The toga became the uniform. The scroll became the screen. The roads became fiber optic cables. And the temples? They turned into skyscrapers. But the purpose, efficiency, control, spectacle remains untouched. We think we're far from ancient Rome. But every time we stand in line under a fluorescent dome, wait for our number to be called, follow a regulation, accept a surveillance app for our safety. We are citizens of a new empire, not free people in a void. Rome lives in our habits, in how we structure time, in how we number years, in how we name months after emperors, in how we worship data like oracles. Augustus had the forum. We have the feed. Both are curated performances of power. We scroll as they strolled, looking, reacting, judging. The Colosseum was built to distract, to entertain, to remind people who was in charge. Today, we carry our Colosseums in our pockets. Instant entertainment. Endless games. Controlled fury. Organized spectacle. Rage monetized. Just like it was in the arena. Bread and circuses. Still effective. Still comforting. Still blinding. And what about language? Rome spread Latin to unify its empire. Today, English through technology, media, and money acts as the modern lingua franca, a new imperial tongue, one you must learn if you wish to be seen, heard, counted. Rome didn't vanish. It uploaded itself. It embedded its values into code, its structure into institutions. The Senate became Congress. The empire became global influence. The legions became drones and data analysts. The gods were replaced by brands. Jupiter became Apple. Mars became Nike. Venus became Instagram. And each demands loyalty, ritual, sacrifice. We burn time on altars glowing blue. The emperors no longer wave from balconies. They go live. They post. They trend. But their desire is unchanged. Attention, applause, permanence. We call it virality, but it's imperial. Every like is a coin in the fountain of relevance. And deep down, the same need lingers, to be remembered, to matter, to exist beyond the grave. Rome built statues. We build digital legacies. They feared being forgotten. So do we. Our servers are the new archives. Our backups the new temples. Our selfies the new busts. Eternal, we hope. Archived forever. But like Rome, our systems age. They bloat. They crack. They corrupt. Rome had emperors who lost touch with reality. We have influencers who do the same. Rome had elites isolated from the streets. So do we. Rome offered citizenship as privilege. Now it's access. Verified, logged in, approved, included. In the empire of convenience. And just like Rome, we trade freedom for comfort, for ease, for order, for curated chaos. And when something doesn't fit, it's suppressed, erased, quietly buried. The Senate still argues, just in air-conditioned rooms. The provinces still rebel, just with hashtags and hacks. The power centers still extract, still centralize, still smile as they rule. And we obey, because it's easier, because we're tired, because the illusion of order is more comforting than the reality of freedom. We don't carry swords, we carry terms of service. But both control behavior, both limit dissent. Rome paved the way literally. Straight roads, fast messengers, predictable routes. Now we have internet backbones and data highways. The concept is the same. Speed is power. Control the flow, and you control the empire. Rome built aqueducts to control water. We build networks to control information, both essential, both invisible, until they break. And when they do, panic follows. Because the system is supposed to work. Because Rome is supposed to last. But nothing does. Not really. Every empire believes it's different. That it has solved the puzzle. That it has made the unbreakable machine. But even machines rust. Even code erodes. Even clouds crash. Rome thought it was eternal. So do we. But beneath our mirrors are polished. Screens are cracks, growing, spreading, and we don't want to see them. Because to see them is to admit we've seen this story before. We know how it ends. Slowly, then suddenly. But for now, the illusion holds. The marble gleams. The data flows. The voices cheer. The statues post. And the empire scrolls on. Rome didn't fall in a day, and neither will we. But reflections don't lie forever. One day, we'll look into the mirror, and the face staring back won't be our own. It'll be Rome's. Chapter 11. The Eternal Return. Every empire tells itself we are different, that we've learned from history, that we've evolved, that this time the center will hold, that this time the expansion is just, that this time the system is too smart, too interconnected, too essential to fall. But all of them, every empire stares into the same mirror, and the reflection is Roman. Rome was not the first empire, but it became the template, the ghost in the machine, the myth every power wants to wear like armor. Rome is the measure against which greatness is still compared. The roads, the legions, the law, the order, this was civilization, they said. This was destiny. And ever since, others have traced its shape. Not in marble, but in steel, in oil, in silicon, in policy, in maps, and always with the same fatal belief that permanence can be engineered. But what if empire is not a destination, but a loop, a script, a tragic cycle, dressed in new colors, expansion, control, excess, decay, collapse, repeat, every time we rename it. But the shape is always there, because Rome is not just history, it is architecture for ambition. Every global power since has borrowed from it, often without knowing. They take the symbols, the rhetoric, the dream, and they tell themselves it's new. But the bones are old, the systems echo, bureaucracy, surveillance, propaganda, spectacle, bread, and circuses modernized, optimized, digitized, but unchanged in function. And the deeper truth is, empires don't just repeat, they resurrect. The eternal city was not named by accident. It was a promise and a warning, that even after collapse, the idea lingers, waiting to be reborn. Byzantium rose as Rome in gold. The Church inherited the structure. The Enlightenment inherited the language. The West inherited the throne. Even as the bodies changed, the ghost remained. That's the trick of the eternal return. It never comes back the same way twice, but it always comes back. Different name, same logic, different flag, same hunger, different weapons, same will. Rome promised stability through control, justice through strength, unity through hierarchy, and those ideas still seduce, especially in chaos, especially when the world fractures. That's when empire returns, not as a conqueror, but as a cure. It offers simplicity, predictability, a system to hold the world still, and we take it, gratefully, repeatedly, because chaos terrifies us more than tyranny. And so the cycle continues. Every generation swears it will not repeat the past, but the past is patient. It knows the path. It knows how to appeal to fear, to pride, to the need for meaning, and it wears the mask of progress. But look closer, and the seams of Rome are still there. The Senate becomes parliament. The emperor becomes the executive. The Colosseum becomes mass media, and the pox becomes policy. Empire adapts. It doesn't need to be called empire. It only needs to act like one. And we citizens of the moment often don't notice, because it feels normal. It feels inevitable. But that is the spell. That is the mirror. We look into the future, and Rome stares back, not because we can't escape it, but because we refuse to see it. We think technology will save us. But Rome had its own innovations. Concrete, aqueducts, logistics. It didn't fall because it lacked progress. It fell because its systems outgrew its soul, because it forgot what it served, because it became a machine that consumed itself. And every modern empire risks the same fate. Endless expansion, resource strain, internal rot masked by external pride, and all while telling itself the same lie. We are different, but decay doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, as comfort, as compromise, as ritual with no meaning, as symbols with no soul, as endless campaigns abroad while cracks form at home. And when collapse comes, it comes as a surprise, even though the signs were always there. And yet always we rebuild. We reach for Rome again. We put on the mantle, because the dream is too beautiful, the vision of unity, of greatness, of control. It flatters us. It promises that we are the chosen, that history leads here, that we can defy the fall. But empire does not love its builders. It uses them, consumes them, and when it's done, it forgets them. The names etched in stone fade. The triumphs become trivia. The masses become numbers, and the story resets. The empire falls. The memory lingers. The new empire rises, and the mirror remains, waiting, watching, reflecting. That is the eternal return. Not a prophecy, not a curse, but a pattern, a rhythm. The heartbeat of power repeating across centuries. And unless we recognize the reflection, we are doomed to become it again and again and again. Chapter 12, Rome Inside Us. Maybe Rome never needed to survive on maps. Maybe it survives in minds. Not as ruins, but as rhythm. Not as empire, but as instinct. Maybe Rome lives in the way we look at the world and want it to bend. In how we structure cities, hierarchies, systems imagining order as salvation. Maybe it lives in ambition, in the part of us that wants more, that builds higher, that organizes, expands, dominates. Because Rome was not just a place, it was a pattern. It promised immortality through control. It offered identity through structure. It told us that greatness could be engineered, that history could be conquered, that memory could be made permanent, and we believed it. Still do. We carry that belief into everything, into governments, companies, schools, algorithms, The idea that everything must grow, scale, centralize. That people must be counted, sorted, disciplined. That the world must be known to be owned. That borders are natural. That power must rise like marble. But maybe the most dangerous place Rome survives is in the self, in the quiet ache to matter, in the desire to be remembered, in the hunger to leave a mark. Every monument we build, every profile we curate, every number we chase, it all echoes the Roman dream to outlive ourselves, to shape something permanent out of fleeting time. Even our obsessions with legacy, titles, fame, they're not modern. They're imperial. The emperor wanted a statue. We want a following. The patrician wanted a name etched in marble. We want a username that never fades. Same hunger, same ghost. Rome lives in the way we fear obscurity, in how we recoil from chaos, in how we'd rather be ruled than uncertain. It whispers to us in politics, in architecture, in culture, in the very language we use to define power. Empire, state, senate, citizen, all. Roman, all absorbed into our bones. And maybe that's why we keep circling back to it. Why every generation finds itself drawn to its story. Because Rome wasn't just an empire. It was a mirror. It reflected our best and our worst, our brilliance and our brutality, our love for order and our addiction to conquest. And that reflection still compels us. Even if we say we've moved on, even if we claim to be different. Because Rome was always more than swords and marble. It was an idea, a seductive one, that chaos can be beaten, that the world can be mastered, that permanence is possible, that a name, a nation, a system can last forever if built well enough. And deep down, we still want that. We want to believe that what we build can outlast time, that our systems will hold, that our memory will matter. So we build digital monuments. We construct virtual republics. We dream of global order. But the ghosts are still there, whispering from the ruins, warning us, laughing, hoping we'll see the pattern this time. But maybe we don't want to see it, because to see it is to admit that Rome isn't gone, that it lives on not out there but in here, in how we dream, in how we dominate, in how we define progress. And if we were honest, we'd admit that we love the dream of power wrapped in purpose, of ambition dressed as destiny, of order that feels like safety. But that's how it begins. That's always how it begins, with a vision, a plan, a city on a hill. And before we know it, the cycle starts again. Because empire isn't always imposed. Sometimes it's invited, welcomed, voted for. Because the alternative freedom, uncertainty, humility is harder, scarier, slower. But if we let Rome live unexamined, we become it. Not in glory, but in shadow. Not in triumph, but in repetition. Because every time we act like greatness means control, we rebuild the empire. Every time we value order over justice, structure over soul, legacy over life, we invite Rome back in. Not as marble, but as mindset. And that mindset doesn't wear togas anymore. It wears suits, badges, logos, code. It moves faster, hides better, speaks smoother. But its goal is the same. Permanence, power, pride. And maybe, just maybe, the only way to break the cycle is to stop chasing Rome. To let the empire stay buried. To learn from it instead of becoming it. To build not for legacy, but for life. Not for control, but for connection. Not for permanence, but for presence. Because Rome, inside us, doesn't have to rule us. It can remind us. It can warn us. It can teach us how ambition becomes obsession. How greatness can hollow itself. How even the strongest stones can crack under their own weight. And maybe that's what we're meant to do, not rebuild the empire, but remember the cost. Not repeat its glory, but release its grip. To leave the ruins where they are. To walk forward not in the shadow of Caesar, but in the light of our own quiet revolution. One without statues. One without spectacle. One without empire. Just people, present, awake, free from the ghost.